Today I'm going to give you my top tips on how to make sure your seedlings are the strongest and best that they can be so that your plants grow quickly and they are super productive. I don't know about you, but oftentimes I read that seedlings should be planted out 4 to 6 weeks after they are sown. And I have struggled over the years to get my transplants anywhere near ready to plant out by then. And sometimes when you plant them out, they're leggy and terrible and they really don't thrive. The first thing you will need when you are growing some seedlings is some really good seed starting mix. I have put together some instructions on making your own, which is up here, which you're welcome to check out. The trick with a seed starting mix is it needs to be really light and fluffy. It needs to drain really freely, have plenty of air around it, so that the roots can get plenty of oxygen. It needs to have some kind of food in it so that the seedlings have something to eat. And most importantly, it needs to not be contaminated by any kind of persistent herbicide. My next tip is to add some mycorrhizal fungi to this seed starting mix. You can either dust your seeds with it itself, or you can mix it through the seed starting mix, or you can do both. This mycorrhizal fungi, it forms a really special relationship with the roots of the seedlings, making your seedlings able to uptake nutrients much quicker. It forms a network through that soil and will help feed your plants so they won't get the same amount of transplant shock, and they will just generally grow stronger and bigger. They also show stronger resistance to diseases. Of course, the next thing you're going to need is some good seeds. And if you haven't seen my video about comparing commercial seeds to home saved seeds, check it out up here. It's really fascinating, the difference in growth between seeds that have been saved either by yourself or by someone locally, and you're getting the top premium quality seeds as opposed to those that are available commercially. I've genuinely been quite appalled at some of the commercially available brassica seeds that I've been growing in the last couple of weeks. I've had really bad germination rates, and comparing the ones that were grown with commercial seeds that still do not need planted out versus the ones I've grown from home saved seeds that are well and truly ready to transplant. Significant difference, exact same varieties. It's really worth getting some good quality seeds. And of course, once you put those seeds in, make sure you label which ones are which. The other key to really strong, healthy transplants is make sure you're growing the right type of plant at the right time of year. In the cooler, what's called the shoulder seasons, which tend to be your sort of autumn, fall, and your early spring, these are the times where you can grow your cooler crops. These include things like beets, brassicas, which are your cauliflowers and kales, and cauliflower and kale and broccoli, and peas and carrots and lettuce. And some plants like spinach just won't grow in the heat of the summer, so you need to grow those in the cooler seasons. And then if you're heading into a hotter season, this is when you need to grow your really frost tender, heat loving plants. So beans, capsicums, peppers, chilies, they're all the same thing really, any of those peppers, tomatoes, cucumbers, melons, okra, if you can grow that where you are, I can't, corn, all of those need to be in the heat of the year. So make sure you're picking the right type of plant for what time of year you are getting these seeds started. Now the next thing is making sure you have enough and consistent moisture while the seeds are germinating. This is why you can often buy humidity domes for putting over your seedling trays, or you can wrap them in a plastic bag, or some people even just put a layer of cardboard over the top. This is strictly just as they germinate. As soon as the leaves are out, you need to get rid of that humidity, or you risk having some dampening off disease, which will cause your seedlings to rot out and die. So once you've got rid of your humidity dome or your bag or whatever you're using, you still need to keep the plants evenly moist. Once they've sent down a taproot far enough down into the soil, that's when bottom watering can be really helpful because it keeps that moisture off the leaves. It allows you to water the bottom every couple of days rather than having to get in there once or twice a day. The other thing you don't want to do is waterlog your seedlings because this blocks out the oxygen and the seedling won't grow then either. If you're new to gardening and you're not sure what moist but not really wet or not really dry soil looks like, you can get yourself one of these wee gadgets that will tell you how wet your soil is and whether you need to add a little more moisture. Once your seedlings have popped through the soil, then they're going to need a lot of light. If you can't have them somewhere in a tunnel house or outside where they're getting actual sunlight is significantly stronger than any kind of grow light that you can buy. If you can't have them outside, or if it's too cold, or your tunnel house is too full, or you don't have one, or you've got them inside, then having some kind of grow light is really helpful. Get the brightest, most amount of lumens that you can possibly afford, and make sure they're really close to the top of the plants. They look really silly being so close, but enough light is one of the only ways to make sure you don't get big, long, gangly, stringy looking seedlings. The closer they are to the light, the thicker these stems will be and the stronger they will grow. Now, if you are using grow lights, make sure that they're never actually touching the light, because that will burn them. So you need to keep a close eye on them and move the light up as required. Most seedlings will need some kind of heat to germinate, be it in your house, in a tunnel house, somewhere that's just generally warm, or you can use a heat mat. And I have actually used an electric blanket last year, and that worked surprisingly well. I did make sure I put it under a couple of layers of really thick plastic to make sure that they weren't getting wet. Obviously you need to be really careful using electricity and water in the same space. Seedlings grown outside will naturally have the current of the air flowing past them quite regularly, and this helps strengthen up their trunk or their stem, or whatever you want to call it. If you are growing them inside in a safe space, you need some kind of air movement, be it a fan nearby, not necessarily blowing straight on the seedlings, but just to keep the air moving. And the other thing you can do is brush your hands over the top of the seedlings a couple of times a day. This will help to ensure that they get nice strong stems. Once your seedlings have got their first set of true leaves, it is time to start fertilizing them. There are two options really to go with there. Either you need to use a liquid fertilizer. What you need to do is get yourself a whatever fertilizer you usually use, make it up to the instructions on the container, and then dilute it 1:4, which means put 1 cup of your made up liquid and then 4 more cups of water, and this will make sure that your tender plants aren't upset or burnt by the fertilizer, but it will make sure they're getting some nutrition that they need to grow big and strong. The other option is to foliar feed, and the same thing applies. Usually foliar feeds are done at 1 to 10 of the normal dilution rate, so they're quite a bit more dilute because their leaves are a lot more efficient at picking up nutrients than the roots are, and they're also a lot more tender because they don't have the soil to sort of mitigate the strength of the spray. So you do usually foliar feed at a much more dilute rate, so you can use that instead on your seedlings. The next tip is to only keep the strongest plants. If you multi-sow all of your little punnets, keep the one best looking seedling and just simply trim off the other 2 or 3 or 8, however many extra you've got, trim them off. And just leave that one to grow big and strong. It reduces the competition, they'll grow a lot stronger, and you're not pulling out the seedlings, so that will upset the roots of the good, strong, thriving plant. If you've got a couple of really thriving plants in there, then you may want to look at pulling one out while they're still quite small and potting it on somewhere else. The next thing you need to consider is when you start potting them on, if the roots of the seedlings are starting to stick out through the bottom of your trays, it is well and truly time for them to either be potted onto bigger pots or be transplanted out. If you haven't had a chance to harden off your plants yet and their roots are starting to stick out, it might be best to either get on and get them hardened off and get them transplanted out, or to pot them on into something bigger. This is particularly the case with things like cucumbers and tomatoes, peppers, those sorts of things that you're waiting for your very last frost and probably another week or 2 before you put them outside. If your roots are poking out the bottom, it means they've run out of space, and if the roots have touched the sides of their container, research has shown that that can affect the long-term size and development of that plant, even if it's just hit the sides of a small container while they were quite little. So the trick is to pot them on sooner rather than later. To harden off your seedlings, all you need to do is expose them to the environment that they're going to be growing in. You need to start with 1 hour a day, and then the next day you can do 2 hours, and the next day you can do 4 hours. I tend to double it rather than adding 1 hour a day, otherwise you're going to be there forever hardening them off. So first day 1 hour, second day 2 hours, next day 4 hours, next day all day, and bring them in for the night. And then as long as there's no frosts expected or any really big changeable weather, then it's really good to be able to put them outside and get them transplanted out to where they're going. Before you transplant out your seedlings, it's a really great idea to amend the soil. This will help to make sure that they get off to a really flying start. Add some well-rotted manure or some compost, or your favorite fertilizer, whatever it is that you do to get your soil ready for planting. Don't forget to get it done before you put your new transplants out. Ideally it would be done a week or two beforehand so the biology has a chance to get in there and get stuff starting to break down and get them ready for the plants. But even if you only get that done just as you're transplanting them out, it's going to be better than not doing it at all. And then finally, of course, you need to transplant your seedlings out. This is usually done once they have their second set of true leaves. Ideally by then your plants will be nice and thriving and big and strong and ready to cope with the environment they're going into. If you're new to hardening off seedlings, here's this video here all about how to do it. I hope you found this helpful. I will see you in the next one.